I still remember the way she said it, like she was talking about trimming hedges, not threatening the one thing in this neighborhood that might actually save lives when everything else failed. She stood at the edge of my yard in a bright pink tracksuit, sunglasses on, arms folded, and told me that if my antenna wasn't gone by Friday, she'd have it cut down herself and send me the bill. I've been threatened by people with real weapons and real authority. So hearing that from a woman drunk on HOA power would have been funny if she hadn't been standing on my property while doing it. Her name was Karen, and she had recently taken over as president of our HOA. You know the kind of person I mean. Give them a clipboard and a title, and suddenly they think they're governor, judge, and God rolled into one. She stared up at my antenna like it was some kind of crime against humanity. In reality, it was a clean, narrow mast beside my house, professionally installed, barely rising above the roofline. To her, it was ugly. To me, it was a lifeline. I spent 22 years in the Army Signal Corps. After that kind of life, you don't pick a home by accident. My wife, Sarah, and I bought that place because it was quiet, because it sat high enough for good line of sight, and because I could finally build a proper amateur radio station there. Not for fun, not just for hobby chatter, but because I had a formal agreement with the county emergency office. My station was part of their backup communications plan. If storms rolled through, if wildfires knocked out power, if the cell towers failed, my equipment stayed standing and kept people connected. So when Karen told me the antenna had to go because it was an eyesore, I tried being reasonable. I told her it had already been approved by the previous board. In writing. I told her the county had documentation on file. I even told her, politely, that federal protections existed for amateur radio installations, and she might want to read the rules before she embarrassed herself. She didn't like that. She lifted her chin, smiled that thin little smile people wear when they think they've cornered you, and said she was aboard now, said she was revoking the old approval, said if I didn't remove it by Friday, the HOA would fine me, hire a contractor, and put a lien on my house if they had to. That was the moment it stopped being annoying and became personal. The next morning, I got the official violation notice by certified mail. Big, bold letters. A photo of my antenna circled in red like they'd discovered evidence in a murder case. $250, doubling every week, plus forced removal if I didn't comply. I put the letter on my kitchen table, took one long sip of coffee, and started doing what men like me do when somebody makes a mistake and puts it in writing. I went to my office and pulled every file I had, the signed architectural approval from the old board, the installation documents, my radio license, the county emergency letter, copies of the bylaws, every date, every name, every signature. Then I wrote a response, calm, clean, factual. I attached everything, pointed out that the antenna had already been approved, explained its emergency function, and cited the rules that made Karen's little power play a bad idea. I hand-delivered it and made them sign for it. That should have ended it. A sane board would have backed off right there. Karen did the opposite. She sent another notice. Then another. The fines doubled. The tone got nastier. At one point, they taped a violation letter to my front door where half the neighborhood could see it. That told me something useful. This wasn't about enforcement. This was theater. Karen wanted a public submission. Instead, she got public attention. I started talking to neighbors. Not campaigning, not stirring things up, just listening. And once people realized I was afraid of her, the stories started pouring out. A retired teacher got fined because her flower pots were the wrong color. An old widower got threatened over a garden hose. A widow named Margaret showed me a stack of violation letters Karen had sent her over bird feeders, lawn ornaments, and once, and I swear this is true, because her front porch chairs looked too informal. That was when I saw the real pattern. Karen wasn't protecting property values. She was feeding on control. Then I asked to inspect the HOA financial records, which I had every right to do under the bylaws. Karen refused in writing. That was her first truly serious mistake. Bullies can get away with attitude for a while. Financial secrecy gets people curious real fast. I called an old friend of mine, David, a former Army guy who later became an attorney. I sent him the notices, the approval documents, the written denial of records, the whole ugly stack. He called me back laughing. Not because it was funny, but because Karen had managed to create a perfect legal trail against herself. He told me to keep every scrap of paper and not say another unnecessary word to the board. Then I called the county emergency director, Evans, a hard old Marine who sounded like he gargled gravel for breakfast. When I told him the HOA was threatening to remove a county-designated backup communication station in the middle of fire season, he went very quiet. That kind of quiet means somebody is about to have a bad day. He told me to send him everything and let him know when the next board meeting was. Meanwhile, the neighborhood started digging. A retired accountant down the street started reviewing the HOA budget summaries. Another neighbor compared landscaping invoices from previous years. Before long, something ugly floated to the surface. The HOA had been renewing an overpriced landscaping contract without competitive bids year after year, and the company doing the work had a family connection to Karen. Now, the antenna fight made a whole lot more sense. She needed a distraction, needed noise, needed some big dramatic rule enforcement battle to keep people focused on my yard instead of the books. The HOA's lawyer sent one more threatening letter, full of expensive words and cheap confidence. By then, David had already prepared our response. It was polite, brutal, and airtight. We rejected the fines, warned them that any entry onto my property would be trespass, demanded access to financial records, and notified them that continued selective enforcement could expose the board personally. Evans added a county letter stating, in plain language, that my antenna served a recognized emergency communications function, and interfering with it could create public safety consequences. That got their attention. Still, Karen pushed forward the next board meeting, probably because backing down in public would have cracked the whole illusion she lived on. So Sarah and I showed up early. The room was packed. Not just the usual dozen people with notebooks and quiet resentment. I mean packed. Neighbors standing along the walls. Retired couples. Young families. Margaret in the front row, holding her stack of violation letters like a church fan and looking ready to enjoy herself. Karen opened the meeting with that same fake smooth voice, talking about community standards and enforcement priorities. Then she announced my case like she was unveiling a criminal indictment. Only this time, she didn't control the room. David stood up first. Calm voice, clean suit, no wasted words. He laid out the written approval, the county designation, the federal protections, the selective enforcement pattern, and the board's refusal to provide records. Then Evan stood up. He didn't speak long, but he didn't need to. He told the room exactly what my station did during emergencies and asked, very plainly, whether the HOA wanted the official position to be that neighborhood aesthetics matter more than emergency communications when families might be trapped, injured, or cut off. You could feel the air change. Then came the twist Karen never saw coming. Frank, the retired accountant, stood up with copies of the contract records. He explained the pricing discrepancies, the renewal pattern, the lack of bids, and the family link to Karen. Then Margaret stood up and read 2 of Karen's violation letters aloud. Hearing those petty little threats out loud in a crowded room did more damage than any speech could have. Karen tried to interrupt, tried to gavel people down, tried to act offended, but the room was gone. The board members started shifting in their seats, then whispering to each other, then openly distancing themselves from her. One of them actually said into the microphone that he had never been told about the prior approval on my antenna. That was it. Once fear leaves a room, truth walks in. Within 20 minutes, the board voted to suspend all enforcement action against me. Then 2 members resigned on the spot. Someone called for an outside audit. Someone else called for a vote of no confidence in Karen. She stood there red-faced, shaking, trying to hold on to authority that had already left her body. A month later, the audit confirmed what everybody suspected: financial misconduct, improper contracting, selective enforcement. Karen resigned before they could formally remove her. The county got involved after that. There were lawyers, repayment demands, investigations, all the grown-up consequences people like Karen somehow never think will apply to them. And my antenna? It stayed right where it was. A few months later, a bad storm tore through the area. Power went out. Cell service got spotty. Trees came down across 2 roads. My station stayed up for hours, passing traffic for emergency crews and families trying to reach each other. At one point, I stepped outside between transmissions and looked down the dark street. Porch lights were dead. Houses sat quiet. Rain tapped against the metal mast beside my house. And I remember thinking how strange it is that the thing Karen hated most ended up being one of the few things still working when people needed help. That whole mess taught me something I wish I'd learned earlier. Small people rarely start with big crimes. They start with tiny abuses they think nobody will challenge. A fine here, a threat there, a little lie in a letter, a rule bent just enough to test whether the room stays quiet. And if nobody pushes back, they keep going until they forget where power ends and accountability begins. Karen thought she was fighting an antenna. What she was really fighting was paper, truth, and a neighborhood that had finally gotten tired of bowing. The last time I saw her, she was loading boxes into the back of an SUV, while a few neighbors watched from their driveways without saying a word. No pink tracksuit that day. No gavel. No smile. Just a woman finding out that power looks permanent right up until the second it isn't. I'll admit it. I stood by my mailbox a little longer than I needed to and watched her drive away. After everything she put people through, that felt just about right. So let me ask you this. When somebody abuses a little bit of power, do you think the real problem is the rule book or the people too scared to challenge the person hiding behind it? And if you've ever dealt with bullying in an HOA, a workplace, or anywhere else, tell me, where do you think the line is between justice and payback?